Alright, today we're going to do a tutorial on using Git, which is a type of version control, and on using the Github Desktop App, which is a desktop app that GitHub, a place where you save your code and organize it, which is, so your code is stored online. So GitHub made an application that runs on your computer, and that's the GitHub Desktop App. So a couple of prerequisites before you start this tutorial is, first of all, you need to install Git, which is a version control, so open source, and Git will work with various apps. One of the apps Git will work with is the GitHub Desktop app we'll be using, and another is Atom. Let's take a look at that. So if you go to atom.io, I recommend, at least at this point, for using this using this editor for your web code, your HTML and CSS, and it has good version control communication with Git and with GitHub that allows you to see like what changes you've made and what branch you're on and switch branches, and so you get a bunch of cool stuff for free. This is free, so go ahead and download that. Download Git and install it with the default settings, and then finally we want to get the GitHub Desktop app. So that's going to be here, desktop.github.com. You want to download for whatever operating system you have. Make sure you do this after you download Git version control. I've had some problems with the GitHub Desktop app. If you download the desktop app before you download Git, I think the desktop app doesn't install all of the tools of Git, so I've had problems with like branching and stuff like that. Okay. The final prerequisite before we get started is to have a GitHub account. So if you don't already, you want to sign up for GitHub with your email, and then when you're all logged in and verified, you'll see a page like this. Okay? So one of the ways we can set up a repo is from this website, but I'm going to show you how to do it all using the desktop app. Okay? So, objectives for this tutorial. First, we want to be able to use Git for basic version control solo, and then use Git to branch and simulate. Since it's only me, I'll simulate working on a team on GitHub, and then merge branches into master branch and deal with merge conflicts. And along the way, we will also see an example of Bootstrap, team website that may be helpful to you. We haven't talked about Bootstrap yet, but I'll explain a little bit of that as we go. I'm just going to use a nice, simple team website Bootstrap example that looks like this. So you just got some basic responsive design, and that's what I'm going to be using to show how to use the GitHub Desktop app. So if you don't understand everything about the Bootstrap part of this, that's okay. I just thought it'd be more interesting to have some like actual code to to modify and break using GitHub along the way. And that is it. Okay, so let's start with being able to use Git for basic things. So after you have the GitHub Desktop app, fire it up, and you will see something like this. You'll probably need to initialize your desktop app with your GitHub account. So you probably want to install or have a GitHub account ready to go so that you can sync this GitHub Desktop app with it. And then you want to sign in, and you can see I'm already signed in here. So it has my email. Okay. Now what we're going to do is we're going to make a new repository. So a repository is just a place where your code is going to be stored, and it's going to be copied to two places. The first place is going to be locally to your computer. So let's give this a name, like GitHub tutorial. Let's give it a description showing how to, and then it'll have a local path. We'll initialize it with a README. So this is going to be the local copy of our code where it's going to where we're going to see it. We'll make a folder called that on my desktop, and in that folder, one of the places the code's going to be copied to is my computer. Now, the reason to use GitHub, or one of the many reasons to use Git in general, is that once I want to, I can push the code on my computer up to a repo here, where anybody can grab my code or branch off of my code or modify my code and then recommit it, and depending on what kind of what kind of security settings I set, and there'll be a copy of my code, but not just my code at its current state, but my code at every state with every single change that I've made, so that at any point I want to, I can go back to a place before a change was made, see what change was done. So you can see these code lines were deleted within this change in the file readme.md, and this line of code was added. And that's what that commit was. So I can actually go back in time to any point in my code, see what happened. I can rewind the code on my local computer to that point. I can do lots of things. So this is a great way to work on teams, because you can see what everyone's changing, when they're changing it, and if code ever breaks, you can go to the exact point at which it broke and find out what's wrong and fix it. And it's a place online that every team member has access to, that they can pull from and keep up to date with as they're making changes to their part of the code or their files. Okay, so that's the main reason why to use this. So I'm just going to go back to that home page there, and I'm going to close down some of these tabs that I don't need right now. Okay. So I'm just going to initialize this repository. Now, I should talk about the .getignore. So .getignore is going to be a template. So it'll be a file that starts with .getignore. So it'll literally be ignore as a, so it'll be hidden as a file when you look for it in Finder, but if you look for it in command line, you'll see this file. And what that file is going to contain is a list of types of files that I don't want being pushed and pulled from my repository. So files that I only want saved locally, or I only want saved in one place. So for this one, I just want to show you that they have a template for Unity and Unreal. But the Unity template's the one of interest because Unity has a lot of files that you don't actually need to duplicate because they're created in the editor at runtime, and you probably want to back up your Unity code when you're doing that later in the semester. And so depending on, and there's a WordPress .gitignore too, so we could use that for our WordPress site. So these files are good to use so that you don't save things that you don't need to save, things that get generated anyway or that never change and are in one file location. So for right now, I'm not going to put any whoops, did not mean to do that. Alright, let's start that again. So what was I going to call it? GitHub tutorial. I didn't mean to cancel the whole thing. I just didn't want to put a .gitignore file in there. So let's keep that same path. Let's initialize with a readme, no .gitignore. You can also add a license to it. I'm not even going to worry about that. So I'm going to create repository now. Okay, and so now you'll see I have a current branch master, and this repository is called GitHub tutorial. So if we look online at my homepage for all my repos on GitHub, so I'm online now, you'll see that I have no repository yet. These are all my repositories called GitHub tutorial, and that's because I haven't published this initial commit and readme to GitHub. So let's go ahead and do that. So the first thing I'm going to write is initial commit. This step isn't really necessary. In fact, there's nothing to commit. Okay, so we don't need to do that. So this will happen automatically. So I'm just going to publish this to repository. It's going to ask me, hey, where do you want to publish it to? GitHub.com is where I want to publish it to. I want to keep the same name, but I could have a different name as this folder on my desktop. And description will keep the same. I don't care about this code being private, so I'm going to go ahead and publish the repository. I want everybody to see my code. All right. So pushing to origin means that, so the origin is the place where the code is stored, which is online on github.com. So now if we look at my repositories, I have 10, and I have a GitHub tutorial one. And the only thing in there is a readme and this .git attribute, which is part of the initial commit. The readme file has nothing on it. It has 2 lines and its name, basically. Okay. So the branch that I'm on is master branch, and that's going to become important later when we talk about working on a team and using more than one branch, so each team member has their own branch and they don't change master branch directly except when they have working code to push to it, or the product owner or the team leader decides to merge all the code together. All right. So let's go back to GitHub, and you'll notice that there's no changed files. So we're going to go to File, Repository, and let's show where this is in Explorer. So it's right here in my desktop, and I'm going to just drag and drop 2 pieces of code. Well, copy and paste 2 pieces of code into this repository along with its README. So we'll have let's take a look at this code. So the way to do that is I'm going to go back to repository, and actually, let me show you first. If you go to File Options and you go to Advanced, you can see that I have External Editor selected as Atom, which is that program I told you to download at the beginning. So you can change this to anything that it allows you to, but Atom I've chosen to go with for the following reason. We can open up all these files in this at once. Here, let's go ahead and shut this down. By just going to Repository, Open in Atom, or Control-Shift-A. So I'm going to open it in Atom. Here we go. Alright, so you'll see now that we have our .git ignore, and it's actually a folder with a big network of things that we don't want to worry about, because these are not going to get moved from our local repository to, they're not going to be copied back and forth. So let's take a look at the files that, well, first let's close the welcome guide, and what you're seeing here is, over here is my project, and here on the right is the code that I'm looking at. We can see my style and HTML code, and so this is the basic Atom interface. In fact, let's see if we can get this side by side. There we go. Cool. Alright, so now we can see both style and HTML. So this code right here is, we can actually go to this in my local browser by going to Users, my username, Desktop, and then this was GitHub Tutorial. And there's an index file in there, so if we just go to that location, and test.html. Should have made that index. In fact, let's change that right now. So this HTML file is called test. What I'm going to do is rename it to index.html so that when somebody just goes to this directory, the browser automatically opens up that web page. So, right. Now, if we just go to the directory, a browser should find the index. Perhaps not. Oh. Not sure what's going on there, but the key thing is that the CSS, the Bootstrap, everything's working. I think this is because it's local. My Chrome isn't interpreting that index as a root directory for a web page, so that's okay. All right, so that's what it looks like. We verified that all the code works. So now let's remember what we did to get to this point was we just copied over some code, and you can see these are the 2 files we copied over, and this is all this plus means we've added this code, and obviously everything's highlighted. So this is very important. You always want to write a summary. In fact, you have to write a summary and a description of the code changes you made that is informative, because you're going to be able to see this when you look back at your code and you look at the code commits that other members make. So for the summary, I'm going to do added index in CSS for team page, and this code links to external Bootstrap, core, and jQuery cdn. So just a little description to remind myself is that this code has external links or it won't work. I'll talk about that in just a bit. So now I want to commit to master, and what this is going to do is it's going to push. So you see now I can push to origin. That's Bitbucket. But what this did was it made a copy of the local changes in time. So there's my initial commit, and there's the added changes. But this is only on my local computer here, right? So what I want to do now is push this to origin. So I push to origin over here. And you can see, if we go to GitHub and refresh, we now have 2 commits. We've added index and HTML page, and if we click on that commit, we can see exactly what was changed, and there would be red subtractions for deletions, but we don't have any yet. Okay? So that's how to back up code online. Now, we need to be able to invite other people to pull our code down from the online repository at github.com and modify the code and then push it back up to their own branch. So what we're going to do is go into our repo, and just at the top page of the repo, go to settings, and then over here on collaborators, I can add a collaborator by their email. So I'm just going to add myself. You can actually search through GitHub users, and I'm just going to do that. It says, hey, you are the owner, you can also be a collaborator. That's crazy. But if I wasn't the owner, I could, in fact, I can send this to my Boise State email. And if I had a GitHub account, it would allow me at this point to add it. But I only have a GitHub account associated with my Gmail. So anyway, that's how we would add a collaborator. And then as a collaborator, let me just show you. So for example, I am a collaborator on well, all of these, but what I would want to do is after I get the invitation from someone, I would want to clone or download it. So I click on this clone or download button over here. So I've been invited to a repository, I'm a team member, someone else has set it up, and what I'm doing is I'm going to grab this URL, so I'm going to copy and paste. Notice there's also an open in desktop link here, but I don't trust it because I don't really trust GitHub Desktop all that much. But what we would want to do there then is clone a repository and we would put the URL in. So we would click over to URL, we would put the URL we just copied in and give it a local path like that, and then we clone. Okay? And so now I have access to this Android apps repository, right? The basic process of becoming a collaborator. All right, so I'm going to switch back to the test repository we had by clicking on current repository and finding the Git tutorial one. And so you see now I have no changes. All right. So we've seen how to save our code. Let's make a let's make a change in the code now. Now I'm going to add a h1, and I'm going to go, hi, I'm using Git. Close it. So now to see what that change looks like on a web browser, go to the index, and we've got this big ugly hi, I'm using Git, and that, which is shouldn't be there either. So let's go back. There we go. So that's the change, and I cleaned up the index a little bit. And now if we go over, you can see that it's telling us, hey, you've changed this one file. You deleted this part, and you added this, hi, I'm using Git. Okay? And so now I'm going to say added an H1 at the top. Added a H1 to confuse and intimidate bears that don't understand code. Alright, so I'm going to commit those to master, and let's not push to origin yet, just so we can see the difference. So now if I go to GitHub, you'll notice that, go back to Daniel Hampikian, go into my repository, GIMP, Bitbucket tutorial, GitHub tutorial, sorry. You see that I have one branch, 2 commits, 1 contributor. If you were on a team, you should see 2 or 3 or 4, depending on your team size. Or more than that. You'll notice that there's only been 2 commits, the initial commit and the index. So, and in fact, if I look at my code here and go to index.html, there is no header code yet after our body HTML begins. Oh, we need to get rid of that. That's not good. Should be down there. Okay, we need to change that too. And this part is still here, right? So those changes have not been pushed to master yet, meaning they're only on my local computer. So I want to push them to origin so that they'll show up on master. And then at this point, if we go back to our repo, you can see there's 3 commits. And there's this, and we can look at them, and we can see added H1 at the top. And we know exactly what happened because there was a good description, and you can see the code change is there. All right.